Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for checking out this video. I'm Jake Built. Today I have a 2012 Ford F150 and the customer's complaint is that it has a long crank. A little bit of history on this vehicle is that the customer recently was on a road trip. The truck broke down on him, stopped running. He had a fuel pump installed and he believes that this issue started since the fuel pump was installed. Went back to the shop that installed it. They weren't able to really find the problem. He took it to another shop locally. They told him they thought it was a fuel pump again, so he brought it to us because we're in the same network as the initial shop that put the fuel pump in, so he wanted us to warranty out a fuel pump. We decided to go about diagnosing the symptoms before we just threw a part in it, and good thing we did because we found out that it wasn't actually the fuel pump. So follow along as I walk you through how we diagnosed this problem.
So this vehicle came in with no trouble codes stored, and I think that might be what was throwing off some of these other shops. So when that happens to me, first thing I like to do is scroll through scan data, and I'm just looking for anything that sticks out, any abnormalities, and there's a few key PIDs that I always like to look at. Things like coolant temperature, because it's easy to see if we're way out of normal or what we believe we should be seeing. I like to look at mass airflow in grams per second. Because I can get a good idea if it's reading close to where it should be or not. And I like to look at fuel trims. I'm a pretty firm believer that fuel trims are one of the most important PIDs in your scan data when you're looking for a runnability type issue. So let's just scroll through, see if anything sticks out or if we see any issues. So you can see here one of the PIDs we have is fuel tank pressure. And I want to watch this. It'll be a little more obvious why in just a moment. But this vehicle hasn't been running long and it's not up to operating temperature, so I don't believe it should be in a purge state for the evap system. So I'm just going to watch and see if I have any negative pressure in the fuel tank that might give me an indication if I have a leaking purge valve that could cause some of the issues that we have here. Another PID I want to look at is inferred flex fuel percentage. You can see we're at about 10.98%. When this vehicle came in, it was at about 20%. I actually fixed this vehicle before I decided to do a video, so it's a little closer to normal there. And typically, if the vehicle owner isn't running E85 fuel, which would have 15% ethanol, we shouldn't be having numbers over, maybe 5% or so. When you're getting high numbers, there's something wrong. And so we want to look at what inputs this ECM is using to determine what the flex fuel percentage is. And I can tell you one of the biggest is this mass airflow reading. So I've clicked on the fuel trims there. I've also clicked on the mass airflow. Now we're going to scroll down and choose the short-term fuel trims as well. And then I think we'll have most of the data that we want to look at. So I'll select those so that it shows just those PIDs on the scan tool here, so we can look at them individually. Alright, so now that we have the PIDs that we want to look at in depth a little more on the screen together, a few things stick out right away. So first, that mass airflow sensor reading. We're hovering at about 3.7 grams per second. This is a 5-liter engine, so a good rule of thumb is that you should have about 1 gram per second per every liter of engine displacement. So we should be seeing about 5 grams. That's really low. Also, that fuel tank pressure, again, I mentioned before, this engine's not warmed up. I don't believe it should be in a purge state. If we wanted to verify that, we could either disconnect the purge valve or we could look for a PID showing the purge valve duty cycle or control. But either way, I don't believe it should be right now, and that's not terribly important. What you can notice, though, is the fuel tank pressure is in a negative state or a vacuum. I know it's not much, but if that's not supposed to be in a purge condition, we probably shouldn't have anything there. So what I want to do is turn the ignition off, shut the engine off, and see what happens there. If that pressure fuel tank pressure rises, then I know that I most likely had a purge valve pulling a vacuum on there, and we need to look deeper into that. So let's shut this engine off, and you can see our pressure has risen up now. Again, not high pressure, but it went up immediately when the ignition was shut off. So we need to look into this purge valve and see, because we have a low mass airflow reading, meaning that we likely have air making its way into the engine without going through our mass airflow sensor, or we have a miscalculating airflow sensor. But we also have vacuum in the tank, or low pressure in the fuel tank, when we don't believe we should. I'm going to start that engine real quick, and let's just see if our fuel tank pressure drops fairly rapidly. So here we're starting the engine, and look at that. Our fuel tank pressure dropped pretty quickly. I think that's about all the evidence we need to justify testing the purge valve further. So we're going to gain access to the purge valve here. And what I want to do is disconnect the hose on the purge valve and unplug the electrical connector. With the electrical connector unplugged, there should not be vacuum on that side of the purge valve. So we're then going to install a gauge. In this case, I'm going to use a pressure transducer with a lab scope. You can use a simple vacuum gauge. It doesn't have to be this fancy. I just like to be able to show the data, and I'm kind of a scope fiend, so it's a lot of fun for me. So we're going to connect that. With it disconnected, we're going to start the engine, and we should have nothing on our gauge or on our pressure transducer. So let's see what we find here. Alright, now we can set up our lab scope. So we need to set our probe calibration. In this case, I'm using the WPS 500 on range 2. We can set our pressure range. In this case, I'm going to do plus or minus 10 psi. And then we can put a lot of data on the screen. I'll do 5 seconds of division, which is 50 seconds for a screen. And now we can start the engine up. Alright, and you can see as soon as we started the engine, we had a huge pull of vacuum on our pressure transducer. And we shouldn't have anything there since we have the electrical connector for the purge valve disconnected. So this means that our evap purge valve has a large vacuum leak. And that explains why I had fuel trims that were really high and really low at different times while I was monitoring them earlier. We had an inferred flex fuel reading that was wrong, and our mass airflow sensor reading was low because we had air coming into the engine through the purge valve when it shouldn't have been. So we're going to put a new purge valve on this, clear codes, reset fuel trims, and monitor to see what happens there, and I think we'll be good to go.
All right, guys, so hopefully this video helped you out. Like I mentioned earlier, this seems to be a problem I've been seeing more commonly lately. I don't know if that's because these purge valves are having more problems now than they did in the past, or it's just what's coming into my bay, but with having 2 shops looking at this first and seeing it more often, I thought it'd be a good video, and hopefully it helps you out with diagnosing the cars that come into your shop.